Hi class, this week we're going to talk about how to test a website for usability, and we're specifically going to look at how to do so using usability studies that involve users. So we're going about this a little bit backwards. I talked about last week sort of three different ways of thinking about a digital design, a framework for sort of determining whether a design is good or not, and that was the Vitruvian framework. And I talked a little bit about how a site can be deemed good if it's usable and allows people to meet the goals of what they want to do with the site. I talked about how the design might be considered good if it has good structure and everything technically is working and is laid out into modules that make sense to the user. And I talked about the beauty or Venus toss of the site, where we might look at a site and judge it based on its aesthetics. And of course, to have what's considered a good design, you need to have all three of those things. So typically in the website design process, you'll start out by figuring out what is the site supposed to do and what is the experience supposed to be like, and get a sense of what you want to happen for the user on the site. Is the site supposed to be a relaxing, educational event? Is the site supposed to be a quick purchasing event? What is supposed to happen on the site? And then designers, various different kinds of designers, user interface designers, user experience designers, will sort of figure out, okay, based on that goal and what we want to accomplish here, let's figure out the structure, and then let's add some graphics to it, and both of those things should support the goal. So you would design at least something. You would, whether you draw it on paper or you throw together a site that's kind of not finished and it's a first draft, you would design something and then you could test it. And then you could keep working on it, and every time you have a draft you can continue testing it to make sure that what you've designed meets those usability goals and creates the user experience that you want. So in a sense, we're kind of going about this backwards, but in another sense, we're not. Because the most important thing for a website is that it achieves the goal that it's supposed to achieve and that users can do what they're supposed to do on the site. So usability is one of the first things you're going to consider with a site, is what kind of experience should this be? How are we going to make it usable? What does the visitor need to be able to do? But of course, testing would not be the first step because you have to have something to test. So for your homework this week, when you do a usability study, you're going to test a site that already exists. But let's talk about what usability studies are. So the purpose of usability studies, again, is to uncover actual difficulties that users have when they're interacting with an application. And in this class, when I say application, I mean website, mobile app, web app, something like that. So the purpose of a usability study is to figure out what the site's supposed to do, design a draft, and then figure out what people actually have an easy time of doing and what they actually struggle with to accomplish on the application that you've built. So you let the user experience happen or emerge. You let a person sit down with the site and work with it, and then you, as the study person, observe it, analyze what you're seeing, and then compare it to what you wanted to emerge. So if the purpose of your site is to increase sales of airline tickets, and people in your usability studies have a really hard time purchasing airline tickets, or maybe they have an easy time purchasing airline tickets, but they have a hard time understanding how they might do it again or why they might come back to the site, then you would take that information you learned from the study and compare it against what you wanted to happen and try to figure out what the weak spots of your website are. And then, of course, you would brainstorm solutions. Usability studies, what are those? Well, they're structured interviews that you do with a representative sample of actual users or target users of the application. So if you're building a social media site for your sorority, a representative sample of usability study testers would be people in your sorority or people who want to be in your sorority. If you can't get people specifically interested in your sorority, you could try to get a representative sample of people who are interested in being in a sorority in general. These are delivered individually, so you only test the site with one user at a time. And there's multiple formats. We're going to look at a task-based format this week, but a usability study is a term that covers kind of a few different types of studies, but at the end of the day, usability studies involve testing with users one at a time. And we're just going to happen to use a task-based format or protocol this week. Task-based usability tests are a format in which you assign a tester, again, one at a time, a series of tasks to perform. And these tasks should represent what people typically would do on the site. Users are then observed while they perform the tasks, and typically they're interviewed while they perform the task as well, or at least asked to use the thinking aloud method in which they kind of narrate what they're doing as they try to complete the task. And those sessions are typically recorded with screen recording software like the software I'm using to record these videos. A debriefing session with the user, typically at the end of the session, elaborates on the experience and investigates any issues that popped up. So if you were testing a site that sells airline tickets, if the tester had a problem doing something at the end, you could go back and say, tell me about that experience. What was frustrating? What would happen if you ran across that problem? Writing tasks is not quite as straightforward as it sounds. It's important that when you write the tasks that you use to test the site, the tasks are meaningful and reasonable. So they have to represent things that people are going to do on the website. The best thing to do is sort of distill the website down to 6 to 10 things that people really need to be able to do in order for the site to be successful. Those should be the tasks that you test. Smaller tasks that are less important can be left off or tested later. The tasks have to be motivating, so they have to be easily understood by the user, and the user should be able to feel like, okay, I know what to do, I'm going to go do that. They should be goal-oriented. So again, what are users to the site trying to do? What are their goals? Are they trying to buy airline tickets? And if so, are they trying to get the cheapest tickets? Are they trying to get the tickets with the least number of layovers? Are they trying to get the most expensive tickets? Are they trying to find first-class tickets? You need to know what the different goals of your users are. Not everybody has the same goal, but your site should have a set of goals that will appeal to most of the visitors. It's important that your tasks not reveal tips. For example, a task that says go to the search bar, or something like buy a ticket. If you don't know how, go to the search bar. You don't want to give tips away to people, because then you're not really testing whether or not they can use the site. You're testing whether or not they can use your tips. Tasks should be supported by what's on the site. You shouldn't write a task for a feature that hasn't been developed yet, or a feature that you know doesn't work technically. And they should be in a realistic sequence. So you provide the tasks one at a time, and you let the user finish each task, or at least try to finish each task before moving on to the next. And they should be in a realistic sequence. So if we go back to the airline example, a person's probably not going to buy a ticket right away. They might need to do something like figure out what services are offered by the airline, figure out if they can buy the ticket online. You're going to give those tasks in a realistic sequence. Same with online shopping. When someone first comes to an online shopping site, the first thing they do is probably not put something in their cart. It's probably look around for something. So the tasks need to be in a realistic sequence. One thing that you can do to aid in these task sessions is relate the tasks to narrative scenarios. Now, this is actually a different protocol. This would be a scenario-based test instead of a task-based test. But you can do this if you want to do a usability study, but tasks maybe would be confusing, or you're not quite what you want to test. You can create these narrative scenarios that help make sense of the site, and I'll give you an example. If we go back to the airline example, a task might be something like purchase a ticket for February 23rd to Fresno, California, and that's going to test whether or not the user is able to find the area of the site where they would buy a ticket, and whether or not they're able to go through the steps of buying a ticket. However, you could rephrase this in a scenario-based test to give a narrative scenario. You've been invited to a job interview February 23rd in Fresno, California. Use the site to plan for your interview. So the difference is that with the task, you're determining whether or not it's possible for a person to purchase a ticket. And you're pretty much going to find out yes or no, here's why not. Scenarios, you're going to get a sense of what people might do on their own. So the scenario doesn't actually say to purchase a ticket. It gives you a narrative and it gives the user a narrative and allows the user to kind of recreate what they might do in that situation. Maybe the person wouldn't buy a ticket. Maybe the person would buy the cheapest ticket. Maybe the person would buy the ticket that gets them there the earliest on the 23rd. The task doesn't really allow a person to do um, to explore any of that in the test because you're just telling them to purchase a ticket, so they probably are not going to be concerned with some of those same things the scenario-based test user might be concerned with, like time of arrival, whether or not you would have to sleep on the plane so your hair's not messed up when you get to the interview. You're going to uncover some of those issues in the scenario-based test, and you're not going to uncover those in the task-based test. So let's look at some task examples. This is the Southwest Airlines site, and the tasks, again, they need to be goal-based, they need to be presented in a logical order of what a person might actually do on the website, and they're not going to give a lot of tips and help. So the first task, click on the sale ad to explore current sales. I could even just put explore current sales because that's the kind of task someone might do on that site. And that's going to tell me whether or not they understand that this right here is an ad that they can click, and then it's going to help me sort of figure out what they might do when they're exploring those sales. How might they explore them? Task number 2, find what rewards programs are offered by Southwest. That's going to help me determine whether or not people can understand that Southwest Airlines website has rewards programs and sort of figure out whether or not they're prominent, which may or may not be a business goal. Task number 3, find the cheapest round-trip flight to Denver, Colorado, leaving June 3rd and returning June 14th. That's going to help me understand if a person can understand that booking section of the homepage and what kinds of things they expect to see there versus what they actually have to do to purchase the ticket or to find the cheapest ticket. Notice I didn't say purchase the ticket in this task because in this study, the person would not actually buy a ticket. I would not give them any way of doing that. They'd have to type in their own credit card information and they wouldn't. If you wanted the person to actually purchase and go through the entire purchasing process, you would have to put together some way for them to do it, like a prepaid credit card or a fake credit card number that's going to work on the website. Task number 4, check the status of flight 4522. Another thing that a lot of people go to websites like this to do is to check and see when they need to be at the airport to pick up a friend or loved one. So this is going to help me figure out if people can actually do that on the site, and then find whether it's possible to change your flight information after booking a ticket. So I'm testing these tasks. Can you do this? Can you do that? Users for your test are not what you are evaluating, and this is really important because sometimes users feel like they're being tested and not the website. So when you implement the test, it's really important that before the user gets any tasks, you let that user know that they're not being tested. If there's something that trips them up, you want to know about it because it's not a mark against them, it's a mark against your site. So they shouldn't feel like they're what's being tested. They shouldn't feel like if they can't do the tasks, they got it wrong. So you have to, in the language you use with the users, just really let them know that they're not being tested. If they mess something up, you're obviously not going to say something, wow, we really didn't get that one, because they're going to start feeling like they're failing the test. And there's really no way for the user to feel like they failed the test. You're going to know if the test was a failure based on whether your website was a failure, not the person testing. And you want to keep in mind too that users are partners here. They're valuable resources to help you. You can't think about them as I just need them to take the test. You want to know, you have to have give the test from a place where you're honestly interested in understanding what the user does on the site and then talking to them about why they did those things and how you might improve the site. So users often do have good suggestions for improving sites. Recruiting users. 10 users is generally sufficient for a usability study. Recruiting, in the minor, we tend not to use 10 all the time just for the sake of time because testing with 10 users, you have to sit down in a room for a usability study with the person and go through the tasks. This could end up taking half an hour per person. So just for the sake of time, sometimes in the minor we don't always make you test with 10 people. 5 has been found to be sufficient enough for this kind of test where you sit down in a room with somebody, but 10 is typical. You want to make sure you recruit the right users. So if you have a website for your sorority sisters, don't get your grandma to test the site unless your grandma would go to the site. If there's a section about the history of the chapter and she had been in the chapter a long time ago, then sure, your grandma can test the site. But if the site doesn't have any of those things and it's pretty much geared towards college-age students and recruiting them, then don't have your grandma test the site because that's not a representative sample. Users should correspond to user profiles. So typically in a website design process, one of the first things you'll do is research into who's going to be using your site. So if you're creating a site for a sorority, you're going to research college students and high school students who might want to be in the sorority to figure out what their lives are like and what kind of graphics are going to appeal to them and what kind of layout is going to appeal to them and what kind of information they want to know about sororities. So you would then write user profiles, what we also call personas. And those profiles would help explain who's going to be using your site. And this is a tool for design because every time you have to make a decision with designing your site, you can look at those profiles and think to yourself, well, would Sally, the 20-year-old sorority sister, actually look at this? So you would write these profiles, and the profiles would announce the goals of the user. So maybe a persona for your sorority site is Sally, the 20-year-old sorority sister, and her goals are things like stay in touch with her sisters even after she graduates, feel like she's part of a community. Those are the kinds of things your website then needs to do. And a profile on Sally is going to identify her: empty nester, recently married woman, 20-year-old sorority sister. So the users that you test with should correspond to that. An ideal user is someone who's actually going to need the type of application in the near future. So that's why using these user profiles really helps. You start the design process by figuring out who's going to use your site. Then you test what you've made by finding those people and seeing if you made what you actually wanted to make, if you accomplished what you wanted to accomplish. Usability tests require a moderator. This is a facilitator for the user throughout the test. This person manages the test, the logistics, the dialogue, the pace, handing out the tasks, writing down observations. The moderator, it's really important that the moderator observes the experience. A lot of times users don't say what they're struggling with, but you can see them struggling. So you can see that they're kind of looking at the screen, looking at the mouse, looking at the instructions. They're putting their mouse all around the page, they're doing this, and a lot of times that observation is what can help you understand they've run into a roadblock. So the facilitator or moderator needs to be able to observe that, write it down, and then ask, oh, is something happening? Tell me what you're trying to do. But it's important that they don't lead the task, that they don't tell the person exactly what to do, that they don't try to get consensus or get agreement. One thing I've seen before with usability tests is the tester is having an issue with something, and the moderator steps in and says, oh, this isn't that hard, just put your mouse here and click this. And that's ruining the test because now you've told the tester what to do, you've told the user what to do, you have no idea if they would have been able to do that without you. And when the website is actually published, they're obviously not going to have you there. The other thing it's important not to do is to defend. If you talk to the user and they say, well, I really struggled with this or that, sometimes as the person who made the site, your first inclination is to jump in and try to explain it and say, well, we can change that. We thought it was a good idea because of this. You don't want to do any of that. You just want to go, well, that's a really great insight. Thank you for that information. So you don't want to offer an opinion. You don't want to try to get the person to agree with you. You don't want to defend. You don't want to agree or disagree with the user. If they tell you, this is really difficult, you don't want to go, I know, I thought the people who designed this did it wrong. Am I right? You don't want to do those things. You want to be more of a neutral third party and stay out of it and let the user say what they want to say. Procedures for the test: when you sit down with a user, you want to introduce and explain the purpose. I have a website here. It's for an airline. We want to make sure that when it goes live, people will be able to use it. So we're just trying to get some feedback on our site today. Here's where you also want to explain that it's totally not a person's fault for doing something wrong. So I just want to remind you, we've got this new design. That's what we're testing today. We're not testing you or keeping track of anything that you might do with the site. That's not what we designed. It's totally about figuring out if the site works. So if you have a problem, that's good. We actually want to know about it. So don't feel like we're testing you. We're testing the site. If there's something that you struggle with, tell us. We want to know. Explain the possibility to quit. A person can quit the test at any time. Explain the setting. So, I have my computer here, I'm going to have you sit at it, and here's what we're going to do. You might also explain the setting if you're testing something like a mobile phone app that wouldn't be used in a room. Maybe you have an app that would be used at a grocery store, so you would explain to the person, this would be at the grocery store, so if you were using this outside of the lab, you would be at Kroger or Marsh. Explain thinking aloud. Explain that you want the person to kind of narrate what they're doing. So, hey, we're going to give you some tasks, and as you do the task, it would be great if you could sort of think aloud and tell us what you're thinking and what you're doing with the site, and tell us what you see as you see it. And a lot of times people won't do this at first, and you'll have to kind of remind them, hey, I see that you're clicking on this button. Can you tell me a little bit about what your thought process is here, and get them to think aloud. You're going to write that stuff down, the stuff they say, you're going to write it down, although a lot of times it'll be recorded. You're going to assign tasks one at a time. You're going to ask for questions when they get a task. This is your task. Do you have any questions? Then you're going to observe what they do to complete the task. Write down what you see them doing, their behaviors, and what they're saying. Track the task success. So if they are not able to do the task, you can make like a grid of tasks, and for task 1, if they couldn't do it, you could put could not do, or was able to complete the task but needed help. You can track the time on the task. How long did it take them to do the task? This is why these studies are typically recorded with video, because this is a lot to keep track of at once. You can focus on moderating, and you can go back later and figure out the task success and time on task. And you can capture errors later. So whatever errors they have, write down those errors. What was the error? What was the problem? They should have clicked book, but they clicked search instead. And then you can ask post-task questions, so after each task or after all the tasks together. Either way, you can ask some questions about the site. You can go back and visit any areas they struggled with or anything that they seem to like and ask about those. A lot of times post-task questions will be decided upon before any testing is done. You can do an interview post-test. So you can, after the whole thing, sort of talk about not necessarily what happened with the tasks, but just about the site or the idea of the site. And then finally, you're going to organize, interpret, and present that data. And here's how you're going to collect that data. There's a couple different ways to collect the data. Quantitative indicators, which are numbers-based. Quantitative comes from the word quantity, the same root as the word quantity. These are things like effectiveness, how many people could actually do the tasks. Efficiency, how much time did it take to do the tasks? Errors, what were just the number of wrong paths or wrong actions? Maybe a person who did well, who took the test, found, clicked the wrong button 2 times. Maybe someone who had some struggles with the website clicked the wrong buttons 12 to 15 times. You can count those number of errors, and they mean something. And you can also judge perceived task difficulty. So you could ask in a survey, for example, how difficult the tasks were. Qualitative indicators are non-numerical. Qualitative is the same as quality. You can remember quantitative, quantity, qualitative, quality. These are things like whether a person was disoriented, whether they stopped and got frustrated, whether there were long periods of waiting where they couldn't find the things they wanted to find, were there wondering periods where they just didn't know what to do and they were just wandering around the website. These can be unexpected behaviors. Maybe you thought purchasing the airline ticket was really easy, but what you found is that 10 of your 10 testers did something completely different than you thought they would, so you want to write that down. This can also be satisfaction. Did people feel satisfied with the site? Were they engaged with the site, or did they feel like the site was a burden? So you can collect all of this information. With those quantitative methods, you might give numbers to represent the ability to complete the tasks, for example. Time on task you can measure in seconds. Ability to complete task, you will have to make a ledger sort of like this, or you have to make like a system of scoring system. Complete success might be a 1. If the person only had partial success, they kind of got the task, or maybe you had to give them assistance, you could give that a 0.5, and if they gave up or they did not do the task correctly, you could give that a 0. And this will help you understand for different tasks, what could most people do? If you're closer to 1, it means people could do the tasks. If you're closer to 0, it means they struggled. Last but not least, presenting the results. For the results, you're going to present the results based on the problems that you see. So you can kind of think about the results as being something you would write down and give to the people who made the site. Sometimes you made the site, but sometimes other people made the site, and maybe you have a client and you're testing the site for them. They want to know right away what's wrong with the site. So you're going to present the results in what we call an evaluation report. You're going to name the problem that you encountered. So if you saw over and over again that people could not find flights by price, then name of problem, people could not find flights by price. Description of problem, here's what happened, here's what was supposed to happen. Severity and effect on user. Severity, there's no universal measure for severity. You could use a scale of 1 through 5, where 5 is very severe and 1 is not severe at all. You could just give them words like severe, somewhat severe, moderately severe, not severe. And then you're going to explain what the effect on the user is. Does this frustrate the user? Does it keep them from doing the next task? Does it make them not want to use the site? And then representative comments from the user. So as the user was thinking aloud or answering post-test questions, what kinds of things did they say that made you understand this problem, helped you understand this problem? So what did the user say that indicated the problem? Here you might write, while buying a ticket, one tester remarked, "This is the dumbest way of doing this I've ever seen. I should be able to just click a button that sorts by price." Something like that. So representative comments. This helps reinforce that the problem is authentic and not just something that you're making up. All of this does that. All of this reinforces the idea that this is a real problem by showing the behaviors of the user and the comments of the user so that it's very clear you're not making this problem up. Here's what you saw that leads you to believe there's a problem. That's everything I wanted to talk about. I will see you on our next lecture video next week.